Hi there. This is Junaid Islam. I'm with the Smart City Council, and I'm excited to be talking to Mr. Corey Gray, who has been traveling nonstop around the world for 3 months and has just taken a break before his keynote presentation in Malacca, Malaysia. Corey, how's it going? And just where have you been the last few weeks? I see these random posts on LinkedIn, but where have you been and what have you learned?
I've missed you, Junaid. Since I think I last talked to you, I was at the World Free Zone Conference in Dubai, went up to London, filmed ITN Business Future Cities episode, went over to The Hague, to the Peace Palace for the 125th anniversary, talked about data security there. Then I was back down at TechX Europe in Amsterdam. I went home for 4 days to see if my wife and kids were still there, and they were. And now I'm up here in Malaysia at the Smart Malaysia conference and go to GITEX tomorrow, Metaverse conference in Tenerife, and then November is Barcelona Smart Cities, and then Sri Lanka in December. So
One thing I have to ask is, it's great that you've traveled the world, been to all these events, but as you know, one of the criticisms of smart city events is they're very vendor driven and often don't reflect the communities where the conference is being held. From a smart city perspective, as advocates for citizens, indigenous people, low income people, do you have any perspective in going to these events? Also, I know this is a theme in your presentations to talk about the rights of
yeah.
people. What can you share? Any insights you've learned?
Well, as you know, and as you've just articulated, our focus is very much on the people. We lead with a discussion about people and the places where they live and those outcomes. There's a lot of emphasis on the size of market. People talk about, annual run rates and industry growth rates over time. And we're very focused on not just the amount of investment, but the amount of evidenced outcome of the impact that investment's making. To your point, someone asked me yesterday, what are the smart cities in America? And I said, I'm not sure if there is one. Right? They've just bought a lot of stuff. But if you buy a lot of stuff and you have driverless Waymos in San Francisco, but a fentanyl and crime pandemic, I'm not sure that constitutes a smart city. I'm not saying that to be controversial, but in a city with so much wealth to still have so much poverty and social dysfunction, you would think doesn't make sense. So our interest is in asking those difficult questions and trying to make that difference. So balancing, not just focusing on the economic, but balancing social and environmental in that sort of three-way Venn diagram is very much our focus, and that's what I talk about.
One of the things we saw, in one of our earlier videos in San Francisco is really the smarter the community, in this case, San Francisco, where we had autonomous taxis, the bigger the spread between that and the people who were suffering, the homeless. And that was kind of visual. It was actually visceral as the autonomous vehicle actually stopped to go around a homeless person before our eyes. I guess the question I have to you is, it seems that with more technology coming into smart cities, the ability of the political leadership, policymakers, and community to understand them is getting further and further, certainly with AI. And then certainly if we look at the financial structures, these very complex bond underwritings, the ability of the community to understand these financial mechanisms and what they mean. And then finally, as we build them, the program management is lacking. Do you have any thoughts on how we will, as a global community, fill this gap between, what these cities represent and could be, and the ability to properly design them, procure them, manage them?
Yeah, so you're right. Typically, government, in a legislative or regulatory context, lags behind industry, particularly high-paced technological innovation, because you're asking to regulate about things that didn't exist, right? Now, we talked about this at The Hague around AI and what sort of regulations and challenges that we need to have. The AI Act has just been introduced in Europe in August, which is a good step forward. But the challenge is that, as Carl Sagan said just before he died 30 years ago, we live in a world now that's exquisitely dependent on science and technology, and also in a world where very few people understand it and even fewer people control it, right? And since Carl said that in 1995. It's just got a whole lot more concentrated. Like we've said, 70 people around San Francisco have more wealth than the 3.5 billion poorest people on the planet, right? This is an extraordinary number. NVIDIA's market cap is bigger than the GDP of France. So you've got governments trying to legislate and regulate about new stuff. And even here in Malaysia yesterday, they're saying, do we regulate at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level? They don't even know what level of government to regulate and how those regulations and legislative changes are going to interact with one another. So it's a very, very challenging and difficult time because government's trying to move at pace to make legislation and regulations about things that they don't really understand that govern companies that are bigger than their country, right? This is a huge issue. It's a massive issue.
You know, you've been at every smart city event actually around the world for the last 3 months, and these are big issues. And I know you've had a chance, looking at your LinkedIn post, to meet some really interesting people. Is there someone you've met or something you've heard in one of your meetings that kind of stands out that, you know, is worth the global community considering? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you are. I've got to try and pick through all the different people I've been talking to. What I've found actually, in a lot of ways, more insightful and enlightening than meeting some super guru is the people that I've talked to at more of a community level. So when we did the IT and business show, I was being interviewed by people who aren't smart city people, right? But they found a whole sense of sort of enlightenment and new understanding about smart cities not being big data and big tech, but being, you know, focused on 600 million people in Africa who don't have electricity, right? And 5G isn't the solution in Senegal for all their problems. They need clean water and they need 4 walls on their house and they want their daughters to make it home from school. You know, so these are the sort of discussions. And, you know, so decentralized infrastructure in Africa is a huge opportunity, right? Like the idea to have microfinance around a multifunction node that's going to have lights, water purification, a bit of electricity to charge your phone, to give you connectivity, to allow you to do your banking. You know, digital equity is a huge issue, right? Like if you don't now have an email address and a smartphone, you can't land in Malaysia, right? Because you've got to do a landing card and it requires you to have a phone number and an email address. Now, if you're my father-in-law, he doesn't do that. So it's very difficult if you make regulations that require people to have a certain level of digital connectivity and then you don't provide the resources or the infrastructure or the awareness or the training or the money to ask that community to function. So these are other issues we're dealing with.
So one of the insights, is it fair to say, is scaling projects down so they're more manageable, less expensive, is probably would you say that's an insight? So we're not rejecting technology, we're not rejecting, you know, smart energy systems, but perhaps starting at the community level, making sure it works first before we do a multi-billion-dollar build out.
Yeah, look, I get fatigued with people talking about the size of projects. I know for political purposes and public engagement, it's easy to say, you know, I've invested or spent $200 million on this, but I always say for what outcome, right? If you just take that money, you know, there was a program in Australia a few years ago, the Smart Cities and Suburbs Communities program. Federal government put $100 million into it over 2 tranches. It's achieved, frankly, nearly nothing because the way it was run meant people needed to design projects quickly. They needed to report a 12-month outcome. And we're trying to solve transgenerational problems in 12 months. No, it doesn't work like that, right? We're trying to make, you know, multi-generational decisions on 3 to 5 year, 6-year electoral cycles. That's difficult. We're trying to make decisions where we've got convergent silos of government and society in a siloed operational infrastructure. So the organizational change needs to be made. We're trying to make procurements on an everything as a service model now when governments are designed for capital procurement. There's so much stuff that needs to change. There's skills we have that we don't need anymore. There's skills that we need and we don't have yet. It's a complicated thing. And to your point, that's why the public, I think, has seen a lot of money spent on stuff, but not really deliver any benefit. And last week I was with a guy from Smart Car when I was chairing that panel in Amsterdam for the TechX, and he talked about empathy-led design. It was a really, really good discussion, and he and I aligned incredibly on that. It's not, here's my thing, now buy it. It's getting inside the minds and understanding the needs and aspirations and wants and motivations of, his consumer, which is his community. And we need to do a hell of a lot more of that, not say AI is the answer or digital twins are the answer or blockchain's the answer.
And is it fair to say that probably your big takeaway is bringing in much more critical thinking and data-driven analysis of these projects, both big and small? Certainly, as you're pointing out, the bigger projects seem to have a lower return on investment than the smaller ones. So perhaps by scaling them down, we can make better decisions, but actually be critical even at the small scale to make sure they really, A, serve their community, and B, are returning the investment to the citizens who at the end of the day are actually paying for this through taxes and bond underwritings.
Yeah, and there is one challenge. If you think about Newtonian physics at the submolecular level, it doesn't apply anymore, right? There's a whole different field of physics that you need to apply. And it can be like this with Smart City. If you apply it at a certain level, then it won't scale. So a lot of the projects and the POCs that people design and the trials, they only work at a micro level. And as soon as you try to expand them, they can't scale. So you've still got to be careful on that side of it as well. But, the vendors want to go in and put billion-dollar projects in and sell a bunch of stuff. The other big challenge is interoperability. People are fatigued with vendor lock-in. And building services, infrastructure services, rail, vertical transportation, it's, someone said the other day about a big tech company, they don't have customers, they have hostages. That's the fear of government. And a lot of people would rather make no progress than lock in for 50 years at any price and with no level of control over it. So we've got to overcome that as well.
I know you've already started planning your 2025 calendar, even though you still have more travel. Do you have any thoughts on the focus you are going to take in 2025, given with everything you've learned the last few months on these issues around, the risk of these billion-dollar projects, the lack of critical analysis? So, have you thought about are you going to be integrating them into your 2025 plan?
Yeah, and the thing we've been talking about with our thought leadership group globally that you're aware of are things other organisations have. We've brought on a thought leader of philosophy and ethics. We've brought on a thought leader of urban narrative. Now, what does that mean? It means if you want communities to go on a journey with you, they've got to buy into a narrative. I made the point yesterday that when we were talking about education and future skills, that the most highly remunerated people on the planet are movie stars, music stars, and sports stars, right? Now, if you think about what they actually create, like none of them are doing heart transplants, none of them are making clean drinking water, none of them are feeding 1 million starving people at the moment in the southeast of Turkey, right? But people get inspired by narrative those people create, right? This is the thing, if you'd said 60 years ago, what's going to be the highest paid profession on the planet, and then someone talked about Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or Steph Curry, and then they said, what do? And you said, they throw a ball in a circle. You'd go, how does that make any sense? In a post-war, post-depression world, that they will be the highest paid people on the planet in 60 years, right? About the president getting $500,000 a year, right? That politicians are paid too much. So the narrative is so important. It's just fundamental to getting the community to align and work together and build what we call culture and go on a journey. So for us, we're focusing on that part of it. And then all the tech comes later, it all comes later. There's so much tech.
Great. So Corey, I know you are going to give his keynote speech at the Malacca in a few minutes, and then you're getting on a plane, and then you're going to be at GITEX and then Barcelona. So I guess we're going to check in with you in about 2 weeks. But thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thanks for sharing these insights. And I think there are powerful insights, and we will look forward to scheduling a longer session. When you've done the GITEX in Barcelona, but both huge events, and especially as we plan for 2025 on what did we learn what did you learn, what did all of us learn in the Smart City Council, and what do policymakers, politicians, and more important, citizens need to be educated with. Again, thanks for taking time, and we'll check in again soon.